Welcome to the Stories We Tell and the Honesty Project. Thank you, Melody, for being here. I sure appreciate it.
Well, thank you. This is a highlight of my week when we sit down and sort of drag this stuff out and talk
You
about
too?
it. Yes, it really is.
Me too.
It's a fun project, and it's been so helpful. And it's funny how many times when I start to get stuck during a day, and I have really specific times in the day when I get stuck. I mean, there's the random stuff that just rains down on you like crap. But then there are the times where I have patterns, and I've been starting to be able to go, oh, there's that funny little pattern. Let's give me that room between the stimulus and the response and see if I can change what I used to do, where I used to jump on that little horse and run down that little trail, as soon as the stimulus hit.
Let's do this. Let's open with a quick conversation about the space, what I call the space. And it's from a quote by a gentleman by the name of Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Jew who was in concentration camp during World War II, and really somehow was able to survive while he watched many, many people that he knew die. And so what he did is, after he got out, after the war was over and he got out, he wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. He also became a psychiatrist. And I read this in a Stephen Covey book in the late 80s. And the quote is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." And I mean, we could dissect that all day long, but as you were saying, between stimulus and response, most of the time, especially when we're telling stories that don't serve us, we don't feel like there's any room between when I'm triggered and how I respond, right? And so typically those are the stories that don't serve us and really did in some ways as kids. Maybe we lash out or something like that, but something caused us to have that behavior that now doesn't serve us. And what we want to do is we want to create that space between stimulus and response. And the whole point of this is that when you have the space between stimulus and how you respond, the more space you have, the more likely you're going to have a response that serves you and that serves, if it's an interpersonal situation, that serves those around you. And so everything else becomes in service of creating that space and then creating responses. Third question, if a story isn't serving me, what can I do to make it a more authentic story? That all creates that space. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of my little successes as we've been doing this now over several weeks is I'm a great person for hangxiety. A little bit of alcohol the night before, the next day I have anxiety about it. So hangxiety is a perfect term for me, but I also have it in the evening. It's a situation when my mind turns off, the TV turns off, the people turn off, the book's closed, and I get into bed and almost at that moment, an anxiety bubble happens for me. And normally what would happen would be that would attract my attention, and I would be, okay, oh my God, I didn't finish this at work. Oh my God, I have this, invoice that's not getting paid by some Yahoo, and I've got to figure out how to make them see it my way. And I would just roll down this path of nighttime discussions with me that were not conducive to sleep at all. And I think it's been fascinating for me, like I said, just from these last couple of weeks, I've started to identify, oh, there's that I've been calling it transitional anxiety. There's my transitional anxiety that showed up. It doesn't mean I'm anxious. It's It's just something that's happened. So if I'm not anxious, then I don't have to respond to the, oh my God, what is it that's out there that I'm not solving, that I'm not working on, that's worrying me? And then, of course, then your mind starts to go, you don't sleep. And we've talked about my stories at night because they don't serve me. But also, like I said, not only am I noticing that it's not necessarily at night, my story, but it's also the transitional anxiety that just shows up when I stop the daily activities and move on to the nighttime activities.
And don't you find that creating a story, just staying with the model, that you call that transitional anxiety, helps to create some space? Like, oh, that's my transitional anxiety, or my what do you call it, your
Anxiety.
anxiety. Oh, that's my anxiety getting me into some transitional oh God, I'm broken here. Transitional what?
Like the nighttime one is transitional anxiety.
Transitional anxiety.
My new term.
So when you don't have any space between stimulus and response, that's what I call living by default. Like, well, and we think of it as fact. I get into bed and all the distractions are gone. And oh my God, I'm in my head and I cannot get out. The story we tell is a story of fact. It is a fact and it feels unchangeable. So what you did by just creating anxiety and transitional anxiety, you've created some space to now be able to investigate it a little more before you respond. And that is what this is about. And hopefully you'll get to a point with practice, because this is all about practice, where there's this much space, and then my stimulus may be way up here, but my response is below that line. That's my little self who's hard at work trying to protect me. We'll talk about the protector in an upcoming episode. But, one of the things that I just want us to understand is to have these little models in our head that make sense to us, like stimulus, response, oh, there's default, okay, oh, anxiety, oh, transitional anxiety. I wonder what this is about. I wonder if I could change that story. And over time, the anxiety may disappear all the way, or it may become manageable enough, right, that you're below the line with it. And I saw a quote the other day, or there's a podcast called Do It Scared. I don't have a problem with that. Like, I'd like not to be scared to do some of the things that I do, but hey, it's a whole lot better than I've got to do it and I'm scared and I'm trying to do anything to keep from doing it, and versus saying, you know what, I'm going to just try this scared and see how it goes. And then over time, it's not as scary, is it?
No, that's true. And it's kind of like learning to drive. The first time you're behind a wheel, you're terrified. You've got several thousand pounds of steel around you, or potentially plastic these days, and it just seems frightening. And then you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and next thing you know, in some cases you come to love it.
Yeah.
But what I like about, and I kind of hijacked this a little bit with the space, is about the line also, is really gives me a clear visual with which to identify the conversation in my head, because my head always has a conversation. And if it's, and you've talked about the above the line. So, and that being the little me. And you have some examples of what that above the line type of conversation are.
Always fear-based, right?
Yeah.
And problem-oriented, that kind of thing.
Yes. Usually, in my case, I tend to tend to, the word extrapolate comes to mind, but probably it's more accurate as in I expand the conversation into being something that maybe it's not. So it's always a little bit worse. Somebody's a little meaner. They were, you know, I mean, and sometimes it's kind of funny, even just having a different mindset and going back and reading, say, an email, whereas the first time I read it, I'm like, oh, can you believe they said that?
Yep.
That's totally got me going. And then you have
Gee, do you think that's above the line or below the line, Melody? Do you think that's serving you or not?
I will tell you, it adds a little bit of spice to the day, like caffeine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this will come up in upcoming episodes is, look, there's some really powerful stuff up there, and it's above the line, man. There can be some really compelling things. It just doesn't serve us very well.
So what's nice is then you say, okay, you know, you had a few minutes of fun there with that conversation, Melody, but you're not responding to the email. And now I'm going to think about, you know, to use an old trope, the win-win, which I really love and I believe in. And I think that probably 90% of the time you can execute a win-win, but that never comes above the line with the little me. It always has to be, you know, below the line, thinking about how to manage that conversation in a really non-judgmental, not defensive, you know, looking out for what it is that they need as much as you're looking out for what you need.
Yeah.
Those types of things.
And you know, I mean, talk about a great way. And I think we've talked about this in a future episode, is this idea of, even if you think about creating space, you can do it literally by saying, I'm not going to respond to this until I feel more centered and grounded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we know how much we want to respond and kick somebody's butt about what they just sent to us, even though it may not have been intended the way it was received, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we talk about. We'll talk just a touch about it, is above the line. You always have a protector. There's this part of you that's about protecting you. And above the line, most people call that the ego. And there's a book called Ego is the Enemy. And I've read enough of it to go, okay, I know where he's going, but I hate the term, because this is when you define your behavior and that protector who's there to really make sure, like when you are responding the way that you do to an email, even though, and reading it in a way that's super negative, that's your protector going, I've got you, right? And when you start to look at that part of yourself as a part that's there to take care of you, instead of saying ego is the enemy, which doesn't serve you in any way, can you feel the difference in the space between, oh my God, ego's the enemy, and, you know, this is my protector who's trying to protect me, and yeah, I need to calm him down or her down just a bit. And time does that, doesn't it? When I take time between the stimulus, that email, and let myself calm down and go below the line, hopefully, or at least closer above the line, I'm creating a situation where I'm expanding that space between stimulus and response. And then, and this is why it's so important, not only do I take care of myself, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't need to respond that way. And it's practice, it's practice, it's practice, it's practice. I find out that, lo and behold, in most situations, that's not quite the way it was intended. And below the line, I'm like, and even if that's the way that it was intended, the way that I handle it is completely different below the line than the way that I handle it above the line. So then what I do is I create a situation. Why this is so important is, if I give myself the time to come below that line, a little more centered, a little more grounded, some deep breaths. And I mean, for me, we've talked about an email that took me 2 weeks to write between stimulus and response. And boy, the difference in what I would have written the day that I got the email that I was responding to versus 2 weeks later. And that's how long it took me. And it was okay. Sent the guy a note, said, I'm not ready to discuss this. I need to just think this one out. And so what you have is you're taking care of yourself because you're operating from a centered place, and you begin to take care of other people better. It's way better to say to this guy, got to tell you, your behavior did not work. The client's not happy and it's time for you to go. Really wish you hadn't have done this, but you can't stay. And being able to say that in a much kinder way that's well thought, because that's what we do when we're below the line. We're much better thought. We're not reactive. And so you create a situation when you increase that space where you're taking super good care of yourself, and you're creating situations where you're taking better care of your kids. You have a better relationship with your spouse. You're a better coworker or a better boss. I mean, this is real stuff. This is not, as we like to say, oh, this is real stuff. And so space, stimulus and response, eh?
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that you said that really kind of resonates with me is that a lot of times when people send you an email that you read, they get your panties in a twist, say if we're talking about work. It's if they're not actually trying to hurtle javelins at you, and you respond as though you've received a javelin, then we all know how that goes. The other interesting side of it is the person who is deliberately hurtling the javelins. And when you respond in the way that they want you to, the control in the situation goes 100% over to them. And it's not that we're talking about control in the way of manipulation,
Yep.
but it helps you avoid manipulation by people whose intentions are not always the best.
Mm-hmm.
And there are not too many of them out there, but we've met them.
And if you can confront them from below the line,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing it in a way where one of the things that I talk about above the line is resistance. Resistance thrives above the line. So when I can say this, if I say to somebody and handle it badly, that's really doesn't have good intentions, you're just loading their gun. Oh yeah. Versus, and like this email example that I was saying, it took me 2 weeks to get to a point where it was really well written and I was really pleased with it. And then the guy on the receiving end, who wasn't being out to get me or anything, but it lands in a way where there's nothing to resist. And so you're faced with this message without any kind of this is, let me tell you, this is how I'm dealing with this. This is the story I'm telling, and I don't like it. It doesn't feel like a fit for me. I know my client doesn't feel good about it. Those kinds of things below the line, what you're doing is you're writing from a completely and hopefully non-resistive place.
In a confident place, place that is
such a great point.
The word balance is again overused, but it's a place where you feel not threatened or pushed or cornered, but you are comfortable where you're at delivering your response.
You said two things that are just critically important. So what's so important about what you just said is when you write from a place that's below the line, you're confident. And one of the things that we'll get into down the line is that so many people think that you have to work on confidence and that sort of thing. And what you recognize, what I recognize now, and what you're recognizing is when I'm below the line, I don't have all those crappy stories going, and I'm centered and balanced. And that's where confidence comes from. We're naturally confident. We just get stories above the line in our way, and I'm going to resist. I'm going to tell you, and all of that stuff doesn't serve me, doesn't serve you. And when I let go of that stuff, take the breath, my confidence is naturally there. Isn't that fascinating?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mhm. And I love that. And I think that we spend a lot of time, to be very American about this, in the pursuit of happiness. We feel that it's there. It's there. We get pieces of it, and we are looking for that entire environment where where we are able to handle our challenges, our challenges with our children, our financial challenges, our relationship challenges, our health challenges, our emotional and intellectual challenges. That, of course, is this changing landscape. But the interesting thing is that when we have that conversation with ourselves below the line, your good conversation with yourself below the line, that allows you to not worry about those, the winds, the varied winds of change. And I'm not saying that doesn't, mean that, this COVID stuff and the financial stuff isn't real. And we could walk out of that with, like you said,
Right.
But in a general world, when we're not fighting the actual dragons that sometimes step out of the clouds and crispy critter us, like the cartoon image where you turn to ash and then you're just a little pile and you have to come back. But just in when we have that baseline of that confidence in ourselves, and we can have that when we're not constantly telling ourselves stories that tear us down or focus on our anxieties.
Boy, you hit it right on the head. Right
Mm-hmm.
on the head. That's exactly it. And the other word that you used was balance. And that's the other thing that we will harp on over and over and over again. Going below the line does not mean that everything's happy, joy now. It means that I'm balanced in how I'm perceiving what I'm looking at, whether it's the stories that are going through my head in the middle of the night that aren't serving me, or the person that I'm dealing with across from me, my kid, my spouse, my boss, my employee, that when I go below the line, I'm balanced in my approach. Boy, there are things that I really don't really like about how you're behaving. And I know that there are ways that I can behave that can help you. Doesn't mean I'm taking responsibility for all your behavior, but I'm balanced in my approach. So when we talk about finding that space and being below that line, we're talking about a much clearer picture of what's going on that does absolutely not negate the negative and doesn't overemphasize the positive. It gives us the ability to be in balance. And it's such a great word, isn't it? And it's not overused.
Well, you're right. It's probably not overused.
If we use it right.
Yeah, I think what tends to happen is I think we see it out there and I love the metaphysical world, but I'm going to throw them under the bus, in the metaphysical world, where it seems like there's this almost mystic view of balance. One of the things that you've talked about before that I love is that balance. I mean, while we're talking about being able to handle tough situations and giving ourselves that space between stimulus and coming out doing the right thing, that's the holy grail. But every once in a while you lose your shit, right? Oh. And I think the balance there comes into when you can come back and get it back together, or you let everybody know, I'm losing my shit right now. I'm not going to be able to be balanced. So give me some space. Y'all just go away so we don't make it worse. Because I'm all about engaging if somebody gets up my nose. But if I can send people away, get my act back together,
yep.
Whatever it means, if I need a Snickers or,
It's and this is I think we mentioned it in our last podcast, is if I could do anything with this model for people, it's to give them a common language that they can talk amongst, like with my family. We all know this. They don't know above the line, but they know little me we call above the line little me. and we call below the line authentic me.
Mhm.
And having that understanding and those thoughts about what it means between stimulus and response, and thinking about this as being practice, then what it does is it gives me, I'm going to say, the okay to be above the line, like you're talking about, but it gives me a way to start setting up that space between stimulus and response. Like I have enough, instead of where I usually would have just gone, stimulus, are you kidding me? Response, no room. Right now, just having that ability to have enough to say, I cannot talk to you right now. I need space. And someday I will come back down below that line and we will be able to talk to each other in a way that serves us both.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that, that in itself, like if you had that language for the
Mhm.
people that you dealt with, how much less angst would there be in our relationships or in our own head? Like the protector, man, he'll tear you down or she'll tear you down all day long. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be in the middle of the night, does it?
Mhm.
So that language, and little me, above the line, below the line, authentic me, space between stimulus and response, just these few concepts that are really simple, really common sense. Whew, can they simplify life in in so many ways?
Yep. I agree. I agree. And I love the name of this, "Oh, the Stories We Tell," because it, as you and I have discussed multiple times, I mean, that I'm just in my head telling stories all the time.
Right. And now I'm aware of it.
Hmm.
Now I've got a way to categorize that. Now I have a way to, a picture in my mind of what I need to do. I want to get below that line, whatever I can do.
Hmm.
And life just works so much better that way. And one of the things to keep in mind is there are certain areas where you just don't really go above the line. I don't know what they are for you. I know that for me, for the most part, with my wife and my kids, I don't have a tendency to go above the line. Occasionally I do, and I completely own it. My boy says, gee, you're in little me mode. Yes, I am. Right. At least we've got that common language. But, when we go, so often what people think of happiness as being is it's really above the line. I'll be happy when
Hmm.
I get this, when I do that, blah, blah, blah. And when you go below the line, I think it's more about meaning. Like
Hmm.
I feel like I'm having meaningful conversation and I'm doing things that have meaning for me. That's when I'm truly at my happiest. Having this as a model just helps me so much in terms of moving in that direction. And so there's some areas that I'm going to struggle, may need a therapist, I may need an antidepressant. I mean, I don't know what it is, but as long as I have this model in my mind, all of that stuff is going to be that much more effective.
Hmm. No, I agree. All of this is just tools, you know.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So that's the space and what it means to be above and below the line.
It sounds great. The other thing I want to talk about next time is the fact that above the line can be both negative and positive.
That's what we'll do. You know what we haven't talked about at all? Emotion. Isn't that
Uh,
interesting? I mean, we've referred to it, but
Mhm.
that's what we'll do. We'll finish out the model. We'll show you how emotion plays above versus below the line. And that'll really help to also put that into perspective, because we never want to start with emotion. We never want to go, I'm mad, and that's a fact because I'm living in default. So if I can say, gee, I'm telling a story that's not serving me, and it can be super happy, they're harder to kind of detect in the moment, or they can be really negative, which are hard to kind of break free of. But we'll add the emotion into the model, and that will also help. But we always start with, what's the story I'm telling? Is it serving me in this moment? And is there a more authentic story I can tell? I got an authentic story. I love doing this with you, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm totally into it also. Like I said, I've been reaping the benefits of just even the conversation and the identification and then the practice that allows.
And is this therapy?
This is therapy.
Nope. It's not. I mean, it may be, I guess that really it should be tools for self-therapy, right? Or self-development. But this is not, well, then, and then me saying, well, Melodie, oh.
Well, I have to admit that therapy always tends to make me feel like my guts have been pulled out and not put back in.
Yeah.
You know, I usually leave the hour drained, exhausted, worked over, and not necessarily by the therapist, sometimes by myself.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, and I'm not being critical of therapy at all. My point is, I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to be a therapist or that you're benefiting with therapy with Chris, because that is not what this is. This is a model to help me put my life into perspective, a tool. Yeah.
Anything. It's a tool along the lines of, you mentioned Covey, who I really like.
Yeah.
Definitely his practice is a tool, you know.
Yep.
I gleaned a lot of good things out of that worked for me, you know. So I definitely look at this as a tool. Maybe when you said therapy, I was wondering if it was therapeutic.
Maybe therapeutic. I'm just saying this is not, I don't want people to think that this is the therapy session, or that what we're saying is, hey, go get therapy, you know, go to Chris and get some therapy. No, go to Chris, go to Melodie, and figure out how to incorporate this model into your life, and then you can therapize yourself all the live long day.
That would be me.
Be me too. It's me too. It's everybody, and that's okay, especially when we can put it in perspective.
Awesome.
Thank you. You're the best.
You feel the same. Thanks.
One last thing. Would you do me a favor and give me a thumbs up on this video? And also, if you want to see more, hit subscribe. If you want to see them right away, click on the bell. And then please, please feel free to give me any feedback that you have. More than anything else, I want to hear what people think, to answer their criticisms. And that's a great way to do it, is by leaving a message. Finally, you can find me at ohthestorieswetell.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at ohthestorieswetell, and also at patreon.com/ohthestorieswetell if you want to support me financially and also have the ability to see what's going on behind the curtains, which may be fun. Who knows? Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much.